No matter how old we are, we never outgrow the need to ask questions. And the truth is, we just don't know all the answers. In fact, most of us go to Google with our questions. Just think about the things that you've Googled. Questions like, why can't you put the dog in the washing machine? I don't know who has ever asked that, but whatever. To wondering how old certain celebrities are, how to spell certain words, how to learn the latest TikTok dance. These are questions. But here's the reality. We can't Google search every answer we're looking for. Actually, I take that back. We can. We just may not always get a clear answer. But here's the thing. We're actually wired to look for answers. And most of us, if we're honest, we're all trying to find answers to some pretty big questions like, why am I here? Who are my people? What am I supposed to do with my life? And hunting for answers to questions like this can actually get complicated. And that's why, for the next few weeks, we're going to spend some time discussing some big questions, looking at how Jesus helps us answer them. So here we go.
Bye, Mom.
As a kid, like me, you may remember times in your life where you looked up to someone and wanted to be like them, whether it was a sibling, a parent, a superhero. For me, it was first responders. I had this fascination as a child with firefighters, and I think that's pretty common for a young kid. But I'd play dress up and I'd run around in snow pants and a fake fire jacket pretending to be a firefighter. Whenever I saw a fire truck, I thought it was like the coolest thing, and I'd get to meet the firefighters in the city, and I'd want to dress in uniform like them. I thought it was the coolest. I looked up to them. And at the end of the day, that's totally harmless. But looking back, I actually realized that some of me imitating the first responders in the city was actually also me trying to figure out who I was. I may not have used those words, but there was a big question that I was asking. Who am I? And of course, the older you get, you begin to ask that question in more ways that are even more real than just, copying a firefighter as a kid. Like me, you might use the actual words, who am I? Or maybe you don't use those words, but maybe you've wondered or thought about some version of this question. You see, what we're really asking about is our identity, right? Identity is what makes us us. It's what makes us unique and causes us to be different from everyone else. And if you're like me, you can sometimes struggle to even begin to understand how to answer this question. In fact, we consider many things when trying to figure this out. We can tend to base our identity on what others expect of us, right? We think about what other people want us to be or need us to be, and we constantly feel the pressure to live up to expectations of family, friends, teachers, and coaches. At the same time, we tend to base our identity on areas where we feel judged by others. And so we see ourselves through the lens of being not enough, of whatever they expect from us, right? We're not funny enough. We're not tall enough, not confident enough, not smart enough. The list goes on. And we define who we are based on areas where we feel like we don't measure up. And then also, we tend to base our identity on our image, how we appear to others, right? Others see us as the star athlete, and so that's how we see ourselves. Or our teachers see us as a below average student, and so that's how we see ourselves. But no matter how we would explain our identity, the question for all of us is the same. It's really this question underneath, who am I? And this one big question feeds our insecurity, drives the decisions we make, and determines the friends that we have. This question is this: am I enough? And some of you may answer yes to this question, right? But you'd probably say, yes, I am enough, but ... And you may be quick to point out the areas where you're not measuring up. Others would answer simply by just saying, no, I'm not enough at all. However you'd answer that question, here's the good news. What we talk about today has the potential to be a game changer for you in the way you answer it moving forward. I probably don't have to tell you this, but people have been wondering, am I enough since the beginning of time? In fact, there's a group of people in the book of John in the Bible who interacted with Jesus, and they, we kind of see this question on display indirectly. In John's book, he records a miracle that Jesus performs, and I want you to check it out. It's in John chapter 6, and we're going to read verses 1 to 7. It says, after this, Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd followed him because they had seen the miraculous signs he had done among the sick. Jesus went up a mountain and sat there with his disciples. It was nearly time for Passover, the Jewish festival. And Jesus looked up and saw the large crowd coming toward him. He asked Philip, where will we buy food to feed these people? And Jesus said this to test him, for he already knew what he was going to do. And Philip replied, more than a half-year's salary worth of food wouldn't be enough for each person to have even a little bit. You see, so right away there's a problem. And Jesus could tell that the people are hungry. The disciples are freaking out, right? Hungry people become hangry people really, really fast. I lose my mind when I skip a meal, right? And so the disciples are wondering what to do. None of the disciples make enough money to buy enough food to feed all of these people. But Jesus doesn't seem worried. And check out what happens next in verse 8 and 9. It says, one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said, a youth here has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good is that for a crowd like this? And so Andrew mentions that there's a youth who has some food. And we aren't even told if this youth is a boy or a girl. It's just a young person, maybe even a child. And here's the deal. In the first century culture, that would have made this kid not so valuable in the eyes of society. In fact, children tended to be viewed only as property. The only value children had was in what they could do for their family. But here's something else to notice. The young person didn't just have regular bread, he or she had barley loaves. And it's interesting that John decides to include this detail. Because you see, back then, this was the kind of bread that people who were poor ate. This was the kind of bread you ate when you didn't have a lot of money or status. And so this child obviously didn't come from a family with a lot, but he or she was willing to use what they had anyway. And so John continues in verses 10 to 15. It says, Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass there. They sat down, about 5,000 of them. Then Jesus took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he distributed it to those who were sitting there. He did the same with the fish, each getting as much as they wanted. And when they had plenty to eat, he said to his disciples, gather up the leftover pieces so that nothing will be wasted. And so they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves that had been left over by those who had eaten. And when the people saw that he had done a miraculous sign, they said, this is truly the prophet who is coming into the world. Jesus understood that they were about to come and force him to be their king, so he took refuge again alone on a mountain. Jesus did something miraculous that only he could do. He took a little bit of barley bread and fish and he fed the crowd. And there ended up being so much food that there were even leftovers. Like, that's a crazy miracle. And Jesus is the obvious hero of the story, but John makes it a point to draw attention to another, the youth in the story, that kid. Not given a name, not coming from wealth or privilege, not having a lot to offer, he's still featured front and center. And I wonder if John doesn't want us to forget the role Jesus allowed that kid to have in the story. You see, Jesus could have provided the food with zero help. He made blind people see. He brought dead people back to life. It wouldn't have taken much for Jesus to bring food out of nowhere, but that's not what happened. Jesus takes the food from a barely noticed child and makes the child a part of the story taking place. Why? Because Jesus knew who this kid was. He was made in the image of God, and that alone made this young person a part of the story worth celebrating. Jesus wasn't limited by what this kid had or didn't have. And the same is true for you and for me. Jesus says that what we have and who we are, it's enough. So you need to hear this. You don't have to prove you're enough. But you see, we struggle with feeling like we actually measure up in all sorts of ways. Like if I just achieved, a certain level of success in school, that will be enough for my teachers or parents to approve. If I'm funny enough, smart enough, skinny enough, trendy enough, fast enough, pretty enough, strong enough, successful enough, even Christian enough, then I'll measure up, right? No. To be honest with you, that's exhausting. And Jesus says we don't need to live that way. But there are challenges with this mindset. Number one, we compare ourselves to other people. And since we feel like we could never measure up to them, we decide that we will never be enough. In other words, there's always someone who is better than us, which in turn makes us feel like we have to get better in order to be enough. Number two, we compare ourselves to ourselves. We all have an invisible standard we want to live up to. And as soon as we fall in that area, we decide that we're not enough. And so, let's say you play a great game. You're on the soccer team or something like that. You play a great game, but then that game becomes your new standard, which makes you expect yourself to play like that every single time. It's like we've raised the standard for what is enough. And you've reached the enough line only to find that it still isn't enough. And so you move that line higher and higher, hoping you'll feel enough next time. But because of that, you continually find yourself in a no-win situation. Everyone in this room has felt not enough at some point. Even the people who seem like they have it all together. It's honestly a universal experience, and if we're honest, we all have a hard time liking the person who doesn't measure up, the person who isn't enough, the person who is us. But when we add Jesus to the equation, we can actually stop trying to prove we're enough, because like he did with the kid and his bread and fish, he takes whatever we have and he makes it enough. You see, Jesus takes our feelings of not enough and tells us that we are enough. And that's not because of anything that we did. It's important, okay? What I'm saying is that you are enough. What I'm not saying is that it's all about you and it's all about me. Jesus is the hero. He gets the glory. It's because of him and his work that we are enough. He gives us an identity, but he gets the glory. The reality is it's exhausting to have so much of our identity tied up in what other people think, expect, or want from us. It makes us feel like the bar is always moving and the standard's always changing for who we should be. Like we may be enough in this situation with this person today, but what about tomorrow? Who knows? And that's what makes what Jesus says and does such good news for us. His love for us does not change. He isn't temperamental. Jesus isn't waiting to see how we perform. He isn't wondering what we can offer. You are enough because Jesus says you are enough. End of story. You see, the feeling of not being enough it's a normal part of being human. Like at some point or another, we'll all deal with it. And in response, we may try to prove that we have what it takes. And so we practice harder, we study harder, we work harder and put in more energy. We try to prove to people that we're the best athlete, the most accomplished student, or the employee of the month, or we try to hide so that no one notices. Feeling like we're not enough feeds our insecurities, and so we do everything we can to keep people from seeing it. And so the question is, what can we do when those feelings come up? I want you to start by asking yourself these questions. Number one, where in my life do I feel like I am not enough? Is it around friends? Is it at home? When it comes to grades, sports, is it at church? And number two, when I don't feel like I am enough, do I tend to respond by hiding, proving myself, or is it something else? And then number three, how different would my life look if I stopped trying to prove myself or hide in this area? Or to put it another way, what would it look like to believe Jesus when he says, I am enough? And then number four, when I feel that way, how am I going to remember that I am enough? And just to be honest with you, a tip from my own life and experience, memorizing what God said is true about me helps when I start to believe differently. You see, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10 may be a good place to start. Here is what it says. The Apostle Paul writes this: "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." That first phrase is a great place to start. We are God's handiwork, a piece of art. And so when we battle the feeling of not being enough, one of the worst things we can do is to believe that we have to deal with it alone. And to be honest with you, that's why we care so much about life groups, because everybody needs someone to remind them what is true when it doesn't feel true to them. Right? I imagine that even the kid, that youth in the story that we read, wanted to provide for more than just himself or herself. Like I imagine that this kid wanted to do something to help. That's why they offered their food to Jesus. But it's also important to note that Jesus was able to create a miracle, to create enough where there wasn't enough. Being enough is about more than feeling good about yourself, although that is important. It's also about knowing you have everything you need to be a major force for good in the lives of others. And again, that's all because of Jesus. Imagine how freeing it would be to truly live as though you don't have to prove you are enough. It's possible. Jesus says you are enough. That is really great and really, really true news.